does it really mean to be like Jesus? As a follower of Christ, that should be priority number one. But that also means putting others ahead of ourselves and serving them in His name. This week on Wonderfully Weird Living with Pastor Drake, we'll learn that we are called to be available to serve others rather than living in our own self-centered world. Drake Hunter is senior pastor at Elevating Life Church in Fort Morgan, Colorado, founder of the nonprofit 4Dimensional Living, as well as the author of 3 books, including his latest, Wonderfully Weird Living, and the upcoming Wonderfully Weird Goodness. Now, this week's edition of Wonderfully Weird Living with Pastor Drake Hunter. Well, welcome back once again to Wonderfully Weird Living with Pastor Drake. I'm John Waters, your host, and of course, Pastor Drake here. Welcome back once again, sir.
Oh, thank you for having me once again. Thank you for having me on my show.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I was thinking about it. We actually began this podcast about 2.5 years ago now.
Oh, my goodness.
That's hard to believe.
Yes.
It was in May of 2019.
My goodness. I didn't even know podcasts exist back then. I guess we have, yes.
We've talked about a lot of things in that time, but it's been very enlightening and a lot of fun. And this one, this is one of the wonderfully weird commands that I try to live by all of them, but
Yes.
but I especially focus on this one because I think it's so vitally important. Wonderfully weird command number 35: be a servant of all.
Yeah, it's the true calling of the Christian. Mm-hmm. And there's so many Christians that are out there seeking for, whatever their purpose or their calling is. Well, this is it, to be a servant, as we see Jesus being that ultimate servant of all.
Well, and one of the things that we struggle with in this world right now and in our culture is me,
Yes.
being very self-centered. And this is, by following this command in particular, that's a way to break out of that.
Absolutely. It's understanding it's not about me, myself, and I. In fact, I share this all the time. That only works on one planet, and that's the planet Mars. And we don't live there. We live here on the planet Earth, where God so loved the world that He really needs us to follow that, so that then we can emulate who He is, so that we can truly live a life that is very meaningful and purposeful, that then we all get to truly live a life that we are designed to live together.
Well, this week, the wonderfully weird command, be servant of all, comes from Matthew chapter 20, verses 26 through 28. So again, Drake, as folks are turning to Matthew chapter 20 in their Bibles or on their electronic devices, whatever it may be, what is our question to set the tone for this week?
The question, here it is: as a servant of Christ, a Christian, what type of leader are you? One that emulates the world or Jesus? A very straightforward question this morning.
All right. Well, as I said, the command comes from the book of Matthew, chapter 20, verses 26 through 28. I'll read that for you today here, Drake, and then we'll have you talk about it. So here's the words of Jesus in Matthew chapter 20, starting at verse 26. Whoever wants to become great amongst you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be your slave, just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. And I think we miss that sometimes, Drake, that really is the reason Jesus came,
Yes.
was to be a servant to us, even unto death.
Yeah, and that word ransom is important because it just means payment. Mm-hmm. He already paid the payment, if you will, for life. And if we just follow Him properly in the servanthood of His ministry and what that is, and follow me, let's say command, once we understand that Jesus paid it all, we can just step into it, lean into it, and fulfill the calling that God has given us to fulfill. And that is to be a servant to all. And we truly must understand that. And we must understand that through the example of Jesus Christ. And that's what this command is all about. The command is about servant leadership. Mm-hmm. And servant leadership is best defined, again, by Jesus Himself, especially in the Christian realm, or I like this word better because I am the founder of four-dimensional living in the Christian dimension. It truly is. All leadership should be servant leadership, or we're all servant leaders. And if we do not understand this, as the Apostle Paul shared, we will miss the mark. Because, John, how many people are servants, but they're serving themselves?
Right.
As we already talked about, rather than serving others. Now, we have to make it very clear, you must take care of yourself first, but we do this for the sake of service, because if you're not being taken care of and you're not taking care of yourself, you yourself will not be a good servant. But let's not misunderstand that to say me, myself, and I first. That is not the reality. The reality is others. And as I share often, I love this prayer, John, that I pray, prayer. Good night. I'm speaking all kinds of different words today. The prayer is this: others. Lord, prepare me day to day in such a self-forgetful way, even when I kneel to pray, that my prayer shall be for others. Others, Lord, just others. Let this my motto be. Let me live for others, that I may be more like thee. And this is critical. But understand with that, we must take care of our own self in the sense of our own self-worth, our own self-esteem, confidence, respect, everything that is. But that only comes through Jesus when properly understood.
One of the things that you and I both do is we do a lot of studying on leadership, and I believe it was Patrick Lencioni in a book of his that I read that he talked about that he hates the term servant leadership. And the reason he hates it is exactly what you just said. He said, all leadership should be servant leadership. We shouldn't have to define it as such. But unfortunately, the world says otherwise.
Yeah, they defined it as serving themselves. And then it's just so out of pocket when it comes to the Christian faith. We are not to emulate the world, but to emulate Jesus Christ in his servant leadership style. And I understand where he's coming from, absolutely, but that's in the problem of it, and that is part of the problem, isn't it? We're going to define it based on our subjective reality rather than leaning into it and opening ourselves up to truly understand what servant leadership is all about. And there is no better picture throughout all of history than Jesus Christ. Even if you're not a Christian and you would lean into that, and you're like, who is the best picture of leadership? And you would study all of history objectively. There is only one, and it is Jesus Christ. And of course, that's why Jesus came, so that then we could follow him. The second command of Christ, or excuse me, it's the third command of Christ, which is follow me.
Now, I want to talk a little bit about some different types of leadership styles, Drake. But before we get into that, I'm not sure people out there know your background as far as leadership goes, not only practically speaking in leadership roles that you've been in, but also in your field of study in leadership.
Yes, of course, my personal ministry is four-dimensional living. Now, four-dimensional living is nothing more than an analogy for the four faces of Jesus Christ, or four faces of humanity. And of course, through that, through my experience and knowledge and, let's say, insight and just common sense of leadership, I've been studying it now for 35 years. And so really leaning into it in how to be a leader that knows how to influence towards God's goodness, towards God's character, which is the wonderfully weird commands of Christ. And then, of course, being an influencer, not as we see that sneaky little guy in the garden with Adam and Eve, but being an influencer that truly guides you, compels you, inspires you to the reality of life as God designed it to be. And that's my heart, that's my experience. And yes, there's a lot to leadership, but it's not as hard as many people make it out to be. We've made it way too complicated. And so we see the leadership in the sense of the DNA of that in the faith, and we've been baptized with we've been baptized in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And when it comes down to it, those are the three elements of leadership. And if you know those three in a mature level, you're going to be one impactful and effective leader.
Well, let's talk about some of the different leadership styles as maybe defined by the world rather than by the way of Jesus.
Yes, I kind of look at this. We're going to define leadership and the different types. The reason, let me kind of follow that up a little bit, John, because the reason that happens is, what happens is there's all kinds of different styles of leadership, and all are good in their place. The problem with what man does is they take it in their own little reality and think that's all there is, and then they run on that track of leadership and it's the best. No, it's not necessarily the best, depending on the situation, the person, or whatever's happening. And so we have to understand that leadership, in the sense of Jesus, there is a DNA to it, if we can put it that way. And so when we understand it that way, then we can literally take it apart in the sense of understanding and see, I can see why, let's say, this style of leadership happens, or this is the direction of this person. Well, it's because of their bias. They need to humble themselves and see the bigger picture. But at the same time, let's understand what those different pieces are to see what transformational leadership or servant leadership is all about. And that's where we're coming from. So different types of leadership styles out there. One that comes to mind is the autocratic style. This is do as I say. Now, of course, this is a leadership style that's necessary. If somebody's running out in the street, let's say a child, and you're responsible to keep them safe, and they're going to run out there, they need to do what you say. So you can see where that's very effective, but it is not the go-to. That is a leadership style that is in reserve, and you only use it when you need it. But then we think about our reality today. This style, do as I say, not what I do, right?
Right.
And so, but you can see where it's necessary. So I guess my whole point as we're uncovering this, and we'll get to the next one here in a second, is, again, understand that it's kind of like a toolbox.
Okay.
And you have to be discerning. You got to be wise, and then use them in a way that's going to be best for that moment, or that time, or whatever that is. So that's one, autocratic style. You got to be careful with this. When this is overused, it's known as a bully style. Number two is authoritative style, which is visionary, and or, I got to be careful with this, the follow me, not the follow Jesus, but the follow me type of style, which is good if you're the expert. But when you're a friend, let's say like Job had 4 friends, and they considered themselves to be experts subjectively, and they put themselves in that, and it becomes their vision. It becomes subjective in nature. This doesn't work, because when you follow somebody who is subjective in nature, then what you're going to do is to fall in that hole with them. And that's exactly what Job's friends were trying to do, and it was very frustrating. And of course, if you've read Job before, at the end is like, you're all wrong. That's what God said, even to Noah.
To Job.
Job. And so, but again, visionary. Follow me as I follow Christ now, as Paul shared, is the key here. Now, follow me as I follow Christ. Well, it depends on what you're an expert at.
Right.
John, I'm going to follow you in the worship ministry. I'm going to follow you in everything that is, because don't follow me. I don't know what I'm doing. Now, as a senior pastor, now direction, leadership, alignment, inspiration, and all that. Okay, follow me. But you see how it works. It just, you got to have discernment. When do I use it? When do I not use it?
Right.
And so that's a good one. Pace setting style. Do as I do. Now, I think we've all been here before. Watch what I'm doing and then do it. And it's very powerful, as long as the person following is truly paying attention, listening. And so, but do as I do. But what if you're doing it wrong?
Right.
Then we got a problem. And then, of course, we got the democratic style, where we're very polite, kind, but we ask the question like, what do you think about this? This is wonderful. This would be my preferred style. However, what do you think could create some long meetings, some long projects,
and some hurt feelings? If you have a group of people sitting around a table, you say, what do you think? And people throw out ideas. Some people, if you don't use their idea, then get very hurt by it.
Yeah, if they're immature, that's exactly right. And so what happens is when they might flatter you at first, but they then become very unsafe, and they get all upset and they run away and they abandon. And yeah, it's a challenge. All of these are a challenge, but when you become an expert in them and you know how to use these different styles to benefit God's purpose, it's wonderful. You become that craftsman, if you will, who knows how to truly use the tools of leadership, so that then you can get to that style, which we call transformational leadership, if you're out there in the business world, or what we call servanthood leadership or servant leadership. And it's crazy. So these types of styles are just a few. There's many out there, which all are necessary, again, in their place. But the ultimate style, let me say this again, is servant leadership, which is a transformational style of leadership. And we can go in that direction with Paul's comments in chapter 12, Romans chapter 12. We don't have time, but I would encourage you to go and read Romans chapter 12 to truly understand what transformational leadership is all about.
Well, as we've mentioned here several times already, Drake, obviously the perfect example of servant leadership is Jesus himself.
That's right. And we see him being an object lesson, of course, in the gospel, or in the Gospels, I should say. An object lesson to show us what transformational leadership is all about. And we see that in John 13, 12 through 17. So let's kind of read that and see what that is. Now, again, we can never forget the object of our faith is God.
Right.
And Jesus is God. And we see God as that object lesson for us, so that then we can emulate Jesus, not the world. Important to understand that. And so here, John shares these words. Now, again, we're going to read from John 13, and let's start with verse 12. When he had finished washing their feet, now he being Jesus, he put on his clothes and returned to his place. Do you understand what I have done for you? He asked them. Verse 13, you call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for that is what I am. Verse 14, now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet. Verse 15, I have set you an example that you should do as I have done for you. And then verse 16 and 17, very truly I tell you, no servant is greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. Now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them.
Put action to it.
That is key, doing it. And we have to get back to this type of leadership in any position that you sit in or stand in the sense of life. Not just the church, we're talking about all of life here, because we want to live in the integrity of life, or in the faith, so that then we can be a true reflection of God.
Well, let's give the diagnosis here, the problem that we face.
Well, I think we all realize at this point, but the problem is this misunderstanding of, let's say, dignity in the Lord. We need to hear that today. There's a huge misunderstanding of what dignity is in the Lord, and that is the problem. So what does that mean? Well, Christians believe that self-worth comes from status or position in life, first and foremost. That is the problem. And so we're trying to get into this position, thinking that is where dignity or self-worth comes from.
Okay.
It does not. Our self-worth comes from God. And leaning into that and realizing, humbling ourselves and realizing that it's God that created us, and he's the one who has designed us or made us to do what we need to do in life. And when we humble and lean into that and seek after God's kingdom with that, self-worth will be in place. But self-worth comes from seeking God's kingdom, moving, not standing in a position. That's identity. And we want to identify ourselves with the Lord. However, identity and purpose are two different things. And there's a lot of Christians running around in the identity of Christ, but not fulfilling their purpose. And if we're not fulfilling our purpose, we're truly not standing in the dignity of the Lord. We're standing outside of the will of God, where then we're not autonomous as a human being, or doing our part with other people, as the Great Commandment shares, and we are just busybodies, not doing much.
Playing church, as I like to say.
Yeah, playing church, playing life, and you see, how do you know this is kind of, what's one of the things, symptoms, if you will? One of them is you see a lot of people playing church, but nothing's happening. And if there's action, they're what I call a greasy rag. They're just, smearing the windows with that greasy rag, and it's not working. And we have to humble ourselves. That's humbling. Mm-hmm. And when we understand that, then we will understand that, good night, there is a plan in place. Rather than doing it our way and doing it over and over and over again with no fruit, then we just have to make some adjustments based on Scripture, correct ourselves, and move forward so that we can be very effective in our day and age.
Well, let's talk about some of the symptoms then, some of the things that maybe people can identify in life to say, wait a minute, this may be an issue.
Yes. So I guess we can sit here all day and just kind of throw different symptoms out there. One big one is the person who's challenged with this, they have a beam in their own eye, right? The command of Jesus that comes to mind is judge not. We're very hypocritical in our leadership. Mm-hmm. And rather than dealing with our own problems and taking care of our own dignity and identity and all of that I just mentioned, we're trying to fix everybody else. That's a huge sign. And of course, is that what a leader is to do? Fix other people? No. No, you're to guide them to the promised land. You're not to fix them. And it's so important. You are to resolve your own challenges, resolve those problems so you can work in a way that things are being resolved so that then you can get right back on track with God's plan for yourself and for those that follow you. So closed-mindedness. What do you think of that one, John?
Yeah. Unfortunately, we see that all too often today.
Yeah, another word for this is the tomb mentality. And Christians, there's some people that need to be raised from the dead. Mm-hmm. Let's get Jesus into our makeup and let's open up our minds. Because what has happened through tradition and through our own little preferences and through our biases, we have created these walls that have literally pinned us into a very dark place. Mm-hmm. And it's not helping. So we got to open our minds. Let me say this. People are scared to open their mind. And the reason being is because they don't know how to set expectations. So they think of openness and they think, wildness and recklessness. Well, there's boundaries in the faith. There is what we call being responsible. And when this happens, we can put boundaries in place with freedom, if you will, and then you have flexibility. Oh my goodness, life becomes wonderful. But we have to learn to be open-minded with responsibility.
There's a couple others that I kind of thought of, Drake, and one of those is poor communication, which is so pervasive in our society.
Yes. We've got to learn how to be clear. We've got to learn how to identify with one another. We have to definitely understand what it means to connect properly, and then, of course, make it very clear what the next steps are. That's what communication is, and how many people are poor at that? Oh my goodness, it's a pandemic, to use it
right.
in our day and age. It really is. Poor communication is a huge sign. And again, when you fall into one of those other styles, and that's who you are in the black and white or fixedness of that, it becomes very nasty. So they're very poor communicator, and we have to learn what togetherness is. And so when we say togetherness, we mean you've got to learn how to communicate. Mm-hmm. That's what the spiritual needs.
In understanding.
And understand what that is, and in a way that we can influence, mm-hmm. right? There's the three spiritual needs that we can influence in a way that's going to get you closer to God, allow us to be better together, and allow you to actually reach your potential in that plan that God has for you.
In the last couple minutes that we have left here, Drake, let's talk about some things that people can do in order to get out of this cycle.
Yeah, there's many things we can do, but we're going to go right back to the commands of Christ, as we always do. First and foremost, let me share this again. Don't emulate the examples of the world. Okay, your example is black and white Jesus, who came to us. Now, a dramatic pause there, because Jesus does that for me. Jesus came as a servant and he must be our vision of what leadership is. And we have to follow him. And that's the wonderfully weird command number 3, follow me. Are you following Jesus in who you are as a leader? Or are you following perhaps, a hero that's out there that may exist today, but don't forget that hero is broken. First and foremost, follow the example of Jesus, because he is the perfect, let's say, hero or that leader that will lead us to the promised land in the goodness of God, in our character, and of course in our creativity as we're living out our purpose for God. Number 2, that was number 1.
That was number 1. All right.
You need to seek God's kingdom here. You've got to seek to invest your life in the lives of other people. And that includes truly taking care of yourself, understanding your salvation in those different areas. But then you seek and invest your life in other people's life. And the only way to do that is to follow that wonderfully weird command 15, seek God's kingdom.
All right.
And then one last thing we encourage you to do today is number 3, learn to be flexible. Oh my goodness, we could park it here. We only have about 20 seconds left. So we'll just say this is wonderfully weird command 49. It's the last command in the Great Commission, make disciples. And you have to learn how to be flexible if you're going to truly be a leader, a servant leader that's going to serve life.
Well, there you go. And let's go back to that question from the beginning, Drake, just to get that fresh in people's minds again.
The question is, as a servant of Christ, what type of leader are you? One that emulates the world or Jesus?
All right, that's wonderfully weird command number 35, be servant of all. And next week, be a house of prayer. Ooh, that's going to be a good one.
Yeah, we're going to be talking about focus on that one.
All right, that's going to wrap it up for this week. Drake, thank you so much once again.
You're welcome.
Join us again next week for Wonderfully Weird Living with Pastor Drake. If you would like to learn more or have any questions or comments, please feel free to email Pastor Drake at wonderfullyweirdliving@gmail.com. To obtain your own copy of the book Wonderfully Weird, please log on to www.wonderfullyweirdliving.com and click on the button that says Buy the Book. Wonderfully Weird Living is a ministry of four-dimensional living, offering wholeness coaching for mind, body, soul, and spirit. Also, would you please prayerfully consider becoming a financial partner to help the Wonderfully Weird Living ministry impact more and more lives? Please log on to www.4dimensionalliving.com. That's 4dimensionalliving.com with the number 4. Now, for Pastor Drake Hunter, I'm John Waters, wishing you a wonderfully weird week.